Welcome to another edition of TokStocks. I'm your host, Keir Reynolds, and today we're lucky enough to have James Walker, CEO of ARES Strategic Mining, trades on the CSE with the ticker ARS. Hey James, how you doing today?
Hi there, Keir. I'm not doing too badly. Thanks for having me on today.
Oh, you're very welcome. It looks like an interesting project you got going on. I was rather surprised when I was doing a bit of research to come across it, and thanks very much for accepting the invitation to join me. Maybe before we get into the company, maybe we could go into a little bit of your background. You have a bit of an interesting background. I also enjoyed reading up on you. Dive into your background a little bit for those of you who don't know you.
I am a professional mining engineer in North America. Prior to that, actually, I was in the UK, but I've actually been in Canada for like 9 years now, where I've worked almost exclusively in mining and building up projects, designing equipment, helping people get into production. But prior to that, I was in the UK, as you might be able to tell by the accent, where I was a chartered mining engineer and actually a chartered physicist as well. And I even worked for the UK government, building manufacturing facilities to produce reactor cores. And I was also seconded to Rolls-Royce from the Ministry of Defence, where I worked as a physicist designing the next generation of nuclear reactors for the next generation of nuclear submarines. And thrown in with that, there was some military experience as well in the British Army for about 6 years.
Just the type of experience to take on the role of a CEO with a junior mining company. So perfect.
Yeah, it's probably as stressful as the military. So
yeah. Well, it's been a bit of a bear market for mining the last while. It's starting to turn the corner a little bit. So your timing might be spot on here. You might have got through the hardest part, but because you were doing some work kind of on nuclear reactors and things like that, do you ever pay attention to what's going on in kind of the broader sort of like uranium nuclear sort of sector?
Oh, you can't help but miss it. I would say I left nuclear because I thought the industry was on the decline, and now there is enormous enthusiasm for nuclear energy, and you get like a COP28, nations entering into multinational agreements to triple nuclear by 2050. Obviously, that's partly the reason behind why uranium stocks are also rising in price. But there's a lot of money flowing now back into nuclear from government, but also, weirdly enough, from industry for the first time. Like even groups like Microsoft, Google, they're putting into money into nuclear to look at solutions to power data centers, AI. But even there's decarbonizing mandates from like the Rio Tintos of the world, the big mining companies. And even they're looking at nuclear solutions to try and power their remote operations. So I can't help but notice, especially when there's overlap between like the majors looking at nuclear solutions and mining. So.
Hey, excellent. And how did you get involved with ARES and Fluorspar?
So, when I moved to North America, I was more involved in project management of different mining with different mining companies, but I ended up in charge of sort of an empty vehicle, and I was always on the lookout for what everybody's on the lookout for. So something that's near to production would be a good margin, would not need intensive capital investments to get into production. And I wasn't set on Fluorspar, but I was working with a geologist at the time who had worked at one of Europe's largest Fluorspar mines. And they found this little project down in Utah. And one of the things that was interesting about this is that it was being mined artisanally just by two old guys. And they were putting a shovel in the ground and just putting the product straight into a bag and selling the bag. And I thought, well, that's crazy. You don't see that anywhere in mining, where you don't even need to process it to sell the product. So when we went down there and had a look at what they were doing, we realized that the whole district had become available because essentially the industry had been shipped overseas. And the people who had those claims had died off. So we staked that entire ground and finally brought those two artisanal mines out. So we had that permitted area plus the entire district to expand upon in the coming years. So that's how I got involved in Fluorspar. But up until then, I never even knew what it was. And I think that's probably most people's stories, that they never even heard of the mineral.
Yeah, would you mind giving us a bit of an overview on Fluorspar? Like, I was doing a bit of research in preparation for this, and it looks like it's critical. It's a critical material, but maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a critical mineral, which means it's vital to the economic security of the country. And actually, Canada and the US have both classified it as that. But it's predominantly an industrial mineral, so it's used in the manufacture of steel, aluminum, hydrofluoric acid, fluorine, electronics, lithium-ion batteries, cement, glass. It's actually one of the most ubiquitously used industrial minerals. I think the only reason we haven't heard about it is because when the industry pretty much got shipped offshore to China, personnel and expertise in this area just died. And now, for instance, in the United States, 100% of this is imported from abroad. Like, there's no domestic production of this. So just by that mechanism, it can allow you not to hear about this mineral, even though it's absolutely crucial to sustaining industry and actually expanding industry.
Yeah, excellent. And maybe you guys have this Lost Sheep Fluorspar project that you indicated it's in Utah. Can you give us an overview on the project? How big is it? What sort of resources you have, if any, and what stage the project's at?
So we have about 6,000 acres of showings, and we only staked exactly what was showing Fluorspar. So the good part about it is it bursts the surface so you can see it. And so we've mapped out over 200 showings of Fluorspar pipes. And historically, these things range between, say, 30,000 tons up to 400,000 tons, as an example of what can be in these. It's a weird deposit type. It's sort of non-contiguous pipe structures, and there's a lot of them all the way through. So you couldn't put a conventional resource estimate on this thing, because resource estimates typically have vein systems where you drill one end and drill another, and you can interpolate between. But with this one, you need a drilling operation for each pipe. So what we've done is chosen to develop this like a quarrying operation. And so where the project is at the moment, a ramp installation is being installed. There's a plant already delivered to site, and construction of that is actually ongoing at the moment, concurrently with the mine being built.
Excellent. And how does Fluorspar? You mentioned it's like pretty easy you don't have to do much processing. It's like truck and shovel sort of operation. How does it sell? Is it by pound per ton? What do the economics sort of look like of the commodity?
So it sells by the ton. So typically you have that 1 ton or 1.5 ton bag. And even though it's not much processing involved, we saw that actually with an expanded operation, your drill and blasting, you would get host rock or intrusions finding their way into that. So we are going to build 2 plants. Actually, one's almost finished construction now. And then there's another one on site to produce a higher quality product arriving on site later this year that we want to have operational by the end of the year. And that will produce a final product, 2 final products, one a metallurgical grade that goes into the steel industry, things like that, and one higher grade product that goes into the chemical industry for things like hydrofluoric acid, fluorine, electronics. And so but both of those products will be shipped in those 1 ton bags, very likely by rail, as we own our own rail spur, and we can ship that anywhere in the country.
And in terms of selling it, is there a ready sort of market for it, or do you have to build like a sales team to market it and enter into sales contracts?
So when we started, we thought we would have to do that, but the fortunate part is because we're the only domestic producer in the United States to produce this. As soon as we announced we had this, there was enormous interest from industry and even materials brokers. So already we've been approached for anything we can produce, they'll take. And so big material broking houses, billion-dollar companies have already reached out for exclusive contracts for these. So we don't have to build our own logistics and sales team here. It can just be taken straight out of our factory, and ownership will be taken of it. As soon as we put it on the rail spur, it'll become, the customers. But the good part here is that we won't produce nearly as much as the United States needs, and so there's huge room for expansion here. But also, a lot of domestic producers, domestic industry is looking for that domestic supply chain, because international supply chains have become a lot more constrained and a lot more contested, as especially the world becomes a bit more dipolar, and sort of China went from, as an example, a net exporter of fluorspar to a net importer. So you can begin to see that competition for this kind of mineral, which actually has been largely responsible for, say, the increases in price of a lot of minerals in recent years. And fluorspar is no exception there. Like, the price has increased because of that competition for it. So domestically, it's very easy for us to shift in the US.
Excellent. Now, I was reading up, your company's been able to receive a fair amount of non-dilutive financing from sort of the federal and sort of state government. Could you sort of run us through those mechanisms and how much capital was raised?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two. So there's one at the federal level and there's one at the state. And both of those were sought in 2020 because we thought we would be very clever and try and get a non-dilutive financing. And the government was very supportive of this because it was building back an industry that had been lost in the country. And so the federal government connected us with the US Department of Agriculture, which, despite its name, is invested very heavily in just developing any project that promotes rural job growth. And so there was a $4.42 million US dollar investment from the USDA into our company. And on the state level, the state of Utah has a bond that they issue to companies to promote industry within state. And so that was $10 million US dollars that was invested into our company. The reason why I said I thought we were clever is because they were very nice, inexpensive money that we would have obtained a lot earlier. But during actually the mechanisms to close those loans shut down until 2023. But as soon as they opened again to be able to release that money, we closed them in 2023. And so there was a process there of sitting there for over 2 years where we were just waiting for things to get back to normal to close them. But the good part is that the mining market went into a bit of a bear market. So closing any type of financing became incredibly difficult for everybody. So those financings were incredibly useful for us. The bad part was that obviously interest rates went up. And so even though they were wonderful and they kept us, and they're going to get us into production, they're going to get us into revenue, obviously what we had targeted became different to when we finally closed it, thanks to rates.
What's left for you to start production? Could you take us through? You mentioned you're going to be producing two qualities of fluorspar, and it sounds like you're going to have sort of two production facilities. Maybe you could sort of walk us through like what sort of equipment, and then what's left in terms of like permitting before you'd actually be able to generate revenue.
So the good part is that on the mining side, everything's permitted. We could actually start producing tomorrow. So we got sign off for Bureau of Land Management, Utah Department of Oil, Gas and Mining, MSHore. So the mine plan is all signed off and that's all done. So the hard part, you could argue, is gone. Now we just need to complete that ramp installation. So the site has been cleared. Heavy machinery has been brought in, all the loaders, excavators, dozers. All of that heavy equipment is in, and the portal construction is already pretty advanced. It's well over 100 feet deep now into that ramp installation, and steel reinforcement and concreting and shotcreting and all of that's being put in, and it's being built out very quickly. All the delineation drilling, core drilling is also all being completed. So now it's been simplified just towards that ramp installation and driving that deep down into that ore body. So that's only a few months out now till we hit that deposit and we can start taking ore out. And on the processing side, we've already purchased our 50 acre of industrial land, all the buildings that we can house these things, house the operations in, offices, that's all built there. We have a contractor on site at the moment who's building out the first plant already, and they're making pretty good progress with that. The plant itself is all the first plant is all fabricated and delivered to site. And the concrete and steel is being put in at the moment, so that plant can just be slotted in. And again, that's only a few months away from being able to be commissioned. And when it's being timed so the ore delivery and the plant come online around about the same time, so we can start that revenue. But the higher margin product, that's going to come through producing that higher grade. And that $10 million bond we secured from the state, that's going to be producing that acid spar product, that higher margin product. And when that comes online later this year, we'll start producing more acid spar to go to the chemical industry. But it's going to be sited in the same place, and it's going to have the same mechanism with the same staff. It's going to go on to the rail spur and then be delivered to the customer from there. And we've already got the rail spar already locked up as well. So it looks like everything is taken care of on the processing, construction, infrastructure, and equipment side of things, as well as delivery. And we just need to finish these two items of work.
Okay. And do you have anything out there in terms of projected sort of like revenues or margin? Any sort of financial projections that you've put out to the market?
I think there is some public information on this. A couple of years ago in 2021, when we were trying to obviously put resource estimates on this deposit type, we went out to an independent engineering firm, and they actually prepared an economic assessment of the company and what they estimated the OPEX would be in this type of operation, what the CapEx would be, what the revenues and profit margins would be. And actually for this particular site that we're currently excavating, if you were to exclude any expansion potential, you're still looking at somewhere in the region of about $30 million of revenue a year on this item. The good part about that is that the actual margin on this is very decent. So the OPEX per ton could be as low as say $250 a ton, and if you're selling at $700 a ton or $600, you could be looking at about a 50% margin. There are other costs obviously in there before you get to the bottom line, but even if it's a 30-40% margin for a mining operation, that's fantastic. Like there's a lot of breathing room there.
And so is that your first facility that would be sort of the $30 million a year, or is that for like your full mine site when you have both qualities of fluorspar being produced?
So that's a balance between both plants when they're operational. We will hit first revenue, and then as that ramps up, it's actually going to coincide that ramp up period with that second plant coming online, where it's more streamlined and optimized operation, and then we can start playing the market in a sense to see where the best margins are on each product and cater to those individually so we can optimize those profits. But the plan obviously would be to expand what we're taking out of the ground. So we'll be looking at partnering with groups to produce those secondary and tertiary mine sites, but then obviously looking to increase that 30 million revenue to whatever we can get it to, essentially, as much as we can get it to.
Right. Well, I'm sure any dollars more than what you've got now, so that'll be a great milestone to accomplish. So congrats on that. In terms of the ramp that you mentioned you've pushed it, the portal's about 100 feet. How many more feet do you have to go before you're into your ore body?
I need to check that, actually. I should know that off the top of my head, but it's still several hundred feet, I think, to go. Sort of a corkscrew mechanism that goes into the ground like that with offshoot adits.
Right.
There's a few hundred feet left for sure. But we've already turned the corner, and if you see what I mean, so we're
Yes.
already, yeah. So we're just going to keep turning that corner now until we get into that ore.
Excellent. And why don't we, turn the corner a little bit? We'll talk financial and sort of cap structure. What's the cap table look like for ARES? How many shares are outstanding?
So there's about 140 million shares outstanding at the moment. It's mostly retail investors who have been involved in the company. I would say insiders, maybe insiders, management, board, maybe that's somewhere in the region of about 15%. But no one at an institutional level. Just mostly, it's been mostly retail investors, and I think a lot in recent years, a lot of the volume in buying has been Americans, predominantly because it's a very American story, and it's almost assisting to help bring back that industry that was lost.
And are you listed also like on the OTC or the OTC QB or QX?
Yep. So we're listed on the OTC QX. And actually, we're listed in Europe too on the Frankfurt Exchange as well.
Have you been over there to do any marketing?
No, we did actually employ a company a couple of years ago before things got shut down to push it out to German investors. The good thing about the German investors is they're very bullish on mining, and so this was a very unique story. I don't want to wait. I just want to get into production, and then we can obviously look at reinvigorating the story over there. But that's something obviously we'll probably do in the future.
Right. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of cash outlay right now with all the various construction projects they have going. So I would say that's probably a lot of work for the team to kind of focus on, because it's a pretty lean team from when we sort of chatted last. So in terms of being funded for all of this wonderful stuff, are you fully funded in order to get into production, or will you have to do a raise?
So it's a bit of an odd situation in that the government funding cannot be used for any mining related costs, but so I can say that we're a very well funded company, and so infrastructure, construction, equipment, plants, all of that stuff is arranged and sorted and paid for essentially. But because we can't use any of that on the mining side, we probably will need to go do a private placement just to plug that gap. But that gap is really only $3 million now. So I don't think there's many mining companies can say like $3 million to revenue and they've got all the plants built. So we will go back out to market, and we're going to make it so everybody has an opportunity to become involved now. So it'll be a non-brokered private placement that they can reach out to us to be involved with. But really, we're not looking to raise too much now. It's going to be get that last cash in, get into revenue, and then pay for its own costs as we build up from there.
So, what's a typical day look like for you in the big CEO seat?
Well, at the moment, because there's so much construction on the mining side and the processing side, that's mostly what I'm on. I'm either at site or managing contractors, but principally it's just trying to keep everything on track. There's a lot of moving pieces at the moment if you consider that there's multiple different teams building things up. So it's extremely busy at the moment. And there's the corporate side, there's the shareholder side, and there's the investor relations side that I'm managing with lawyers and exchanges and all that kind of thing, as well as trying to bring money in. I mean, my day to day is very busy. I'm sure my wife would like to see me a bit more, as would my kids. But at the moment, there's so much activity that I say I would probably get in around about 7:30, and I don't leave until it's dark again. So 7:30. It's probably at least 12 hours in the office, and then once the kids are asleep, I go back to work to catch up on emails. So maybe it's a 13, 14-hour day. So.
Well, that's good. You're in the final crunches here. It's going to be exciting and riveting when you get into cash flow. So I wish you lots of luck with that. What sort of specific catalysts could we look for over the next 6 months from you?
I mean, the main ones will be where we're just about to hit things is that obviously ramp installation completion will be a big one, as well as plant construction completed on that first plant. But there's going to be other things too that are going to be interesting. There's going to be the arrival of that second plant on site, the commencement of construction on that. We'll probably put out something about the private placement soon so people can become involved in this final stage of funding. There's going to be more concrete announcements about offtake agreements as we finalize the terms of those, and that'll involve forward sales and cash coming into the company, which will be interesting. But like if you want periodic updates and you can see sort of construction photos as they go along, then there's always the newsletter as well. You can sign up for them. Our group is pretty good at putting out sort of regular updates where you can see visual pictures of things being constructed, concrete being poured, steel going up, and that kind of thing.
Excellent. I subscribe to them and getting your updates. They're well done. As we sort of wrap up the interview here, what makes ARES Strategic Mining a compelling choice for investors right now?
I would say it's a very unique story with a lot of blue sky potential because we will be the only domestic producer of fluorspar in the country at a time when supply chains around the world are becoming more constrained. And the US used to have a big fluorspar industry, and we can actually build that back. And there's not going to be much competition for us doing that because we have the expertise, we've done the metallurgical work, we know what plants work, and we have sufficient partners that we can realize those ambitions. So there's a lot of blue sky potential. Even if we get going slow, which hopefully we won't, the long-term prospects are very good for us. And whereas most junior mining companies, they're looking more long-term, we will be in revenue this year, we will be in production, and that significantly de-risks the investment for anybody because we won't be so dependent on the markets, especially at a time when it's been very difficult for mining companies, as I'm sure every investor has seen the red that's been appearing. But we won't be so dependent on that anymore.
Yeah, excellent. Any final thoughts before we sort of end the interview here?
I don't know. We've covered quite a lot. No, but if anybody's got any questions about anything, they're more than welcome to reach out to the company anytime. We're always very happy to answer questions. We're always very busy, so it can take a few days, but we will get to you. So.
Well, excellent. Well, I really appreciate the time. This has sort of been a first look. The way it works with us is we like to do sort of quarterly or semi-annual sort of like update videos to sort of track progress. As you're pretty close to production, we'll probably be looking to do an update in about 3 months to sort of see how you've done. So anyways, I really appreciate the time there, James. It was nice to meet you, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for the time today, Keir, and the platform. So.